Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Weekend Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Curt Sandoval, with Dr. Robert Klapper. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm fresh off 2 surgeries this morning.
He told me that before we taped, and I'm like, what? I had a breakfast meeting, and I thought I was busy. Hey, one of the things, folks, we always like to start with is just positive news, being grateful. And I spent the weekend with the Rams in Dallas, where they got embarrassed by the Cowboys. But the highlight for me, I have to tell you this, is I just believe in a philosophy that the reason I became a sportscaster is because a couple of guys, John Keating and Brian Dries, invested in me.
Wow.
And I was there in Dallas, and around the corner comes a young man from Southern California named Pat Doney. And 15 years ago, he was my intern.
Wow.
And Pat went from intern to colleague to now dear friend. And he's married. He's been doing weekends in Dallas for 11 years.
Wow.
He's got 2 kids. He adopted a special needs kid.
Wow.
And him and his wife just embody what life is about.
Wow.
Your job is your job, but it's about all the other things in life. And it just was awesome to see.
That's great.
Yeah, and you've told me stories about that young people that you've mentored, and,
Yes.
and to see it come full circle, it was an awesome weekend. So that's my story.
The student-teacher relationship is not a one-way street.
No.
It's not I have the information and experience and I'm giving it to you. What I find when I teach is how much I get out of it as the teacher, because it forces you to get all the information even straighter in your head and connect the dots even better. So you almost want to thank the student for the experience you get as their teacher.
Because when they ask you a question, you said it perfectly, you've got to get it really straight in your head so it can be delivered. And to that point, if there's any young adults listening, is ask questions. One of my favorite things is there's no such thing as a bad question. T.J. Simers actually taught me that. There's no such thing as a bad question. It's just a question. Now, how you ask that question can be bad, but just ask the question, And what I always tell the young students is, ball's in your court. Yeah. You've got to invest in you. I'm here to help you, but invest in you. So
I also find that the different student can bring out the best in me. Some of them, no, I don't really want to tell you anything or teach you anything. But other ones, you can feel their energy.
Yeah.
And what's fun for me is a lot of these young surgeons, they are 100 times smarter than me. But in this moment right now, I have something they don't have, which is experience. So I'm technically smarter than them for this moment.
Yes.
And soon they will surpass me. But that's the pride you should get in knowing that the student will go further than the teacher.
And that's, with these phones, we've talked a lot about, the advancement of AI. And that's the one thing that there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect with today's generation and the respect for that wisdom. Because these kids, when I say kids, these young adults are extremely, extremely smart, but they lack the life wisdom that you have from the thousands and thousands of surgeries that you've done.
One of my professors used to say, Dr. Ranawat, the eyes don't see what the mind doesn't know. And in my world of surgery and life and death, you can be a millennial all you want, but the reality is why is that there doing that? I'll explain, well, that's because the sciatic nerve is right there. And they'll look in the wound and go, I don't see the sciatic nerve. Well, you're at the level where I can see through the skin and see where it is.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that comes after 16,000 surgeries.
Oh, that's awesome. Because that's one of your calling cards is the eyes don't
see what the mind doesn't know.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Give me the best part of your week.
It was this morning, even though I had a busy week last week, but this morning I did a shoulder surgery and a knee surgery. And what really took me back is the tools that I'm using now are not the tools that even existed when I first started in my training.
Wow.
And yet you've got to slowly bring them into your world to do a better job because they're way better than the tools we had before. When I started, you do shoulder surgery, which is very vascular, and you do it arthroscopically through a tiny puncture wound. The tools are even thinner than the pen I'm holding. But when you got any kind of blood vessel that would bleed, we did not have tools that could coagulate, burn, if you will, the tip of the blood vessel and make it stop bleeding underwater. You can't make something on fire underwater. Right. But just like you remember Jacques Cousteau with those flares that were working underwater, now all these years later, it's no big deal. I have a tool that can allow me to cauterize a laser type energy in a water medium while I'm doing the surgery.
That's awesome. Once again, you just got my head spinning. I'm just trying to get 2.5, 3 minutes of sports on the air every week. Hey, one of the things we're going to talk about. So I was in Dallas yesterday, and all of a sudden, they're getting destroyed by the Cowboys, and they score, but Matthew Stafford hurts his thumb. And I'm up there in the press box writing my story about, what a Halloween nightmare. And it's like, and Stafford's coming home. And then my story changed like that because the television broadcast had shown he hit his thumb. What I saw was when they went on a 2-point conversion and he reaches across to score on the 2-point conversion, he's grabbing it. And you learn to read the body language.
Yes.
And he's running off, excited that they converted, but he's holding his hand. Then you see him go to the locker room, and there's no announcement in the press box. And then they've got the backup, Brett Rippon, in. And then the story evolves to afterwards, Sean McVay saying, and this is the cool part of what I try to do, like you say, about the eyes and the mind being connected, is Sean McVay says, I know you guys want to ask about Matthew Stafford. We don't have any more information. And I'm like, he went into the locker room. They've got x-rays machines right in every NFL stadium. Certainly at Jerry's house. He's probably got one as good as Cedars-Sinai. And they said, well, we're going to wait. But what they did say is he couldn't grip the football. Right. And I even made a point to be when Matthew Stafford walked off after the game, and I saw tape around his wrist, and he's still holding the bottom part of his thumb.
Right.
What does that tell you?
So the base of the thumb is a fascinating joint because if you take your own thumb and wiggle it around, it moves almost like your shoulder, which is a ball and socket joint, but it's not a real ball and socket joint. The base of the thumb sits on a bone that literally looks like a horseback rider's saddle.
Oh, wow.
And if you think about how you can sit on the saddle, you can go in all different directions.
Oh, that's great.
And you're the thumb, the base of the thumb, the saddle is that bone that it sits on. But what's key about the base of the thumb, whether there's a ligament injury or a fracture, is how it works. And let's do some Klapper vision, Eli. Okay. And Curt, take a look. This is your windshield wiper, which we all know the base of the windshield is right there. That's the connection of the windshield wiper to the hood of your car. And how does it get the water off the windshield? It sweeps. So take Curt Sandoval's right hand and mimic the windshield wiper as the thumb sweeps across your palm to either hold a pencil with your index finger, fine touch, or to hold a hammer by gripping with your little finger. All 4 digits meet the thumb, which is called power grip. For finesse and to put spin on the football, you need a combination of fine and power grip. Well, what's an injury to the base of the thumb? If you loosen the bolts, they're still there, but they're loose, that would be a ligament injury. So your windshield wiper is dysfunctional. It's not really gripping the windshield, and it's useless, but it's still attached as it goes back and forth across the windshield. That would be a ligament injury, something that you would take 3-4 weeks to get better and not need surgery right away for. But a fracture, that's as if you broke the base of the windshield off the hood of the car and you got no ability to keep the windshield clean, and that would need pins. That would need to fix the bolts and reattach it to the windshield.
So, a couple great points there is most people, I'm assuming, have jammed their thumb.
Yes.
And it's extremely painful. And when you jam your thumb, you can't, if I were a Matthew Stafford, I couldn't grip a football, which connects some dots that I heard them saying. Sean McVay said, we're hoping for the best, but he didn't say expecting the worst, but he hinted that this could be a while.
Yes.
So what is the difference between, you explained the bolt is loose versus it's broken. If when I jam my thumb, what does that mean? Like, could he have just jammed
Yes.
it? And secondarily, maybe it's the Curt Sandoval fat thumb, but I've got a lot. Is that all? What is that?
That's called the thenar eminence, and that's where the muscle bellies are that allow for the ball and socket movement of the base of the thumb. That's where they live. Swelling, stretching, pulling of ligaments and tendons and muscles creates irritation and swelling. You put a splint on, you let the swelling come down, and you're good to go in a few weeks.
It's ridiculously painful too. And,
absolutely.
And so when you say good in a few weeks, would you sense he's out this week? Or if it is not broken, is there enough to say, hey, let's give him, I don't know if it would be a cortisone shot, a shot to reduce the inflammation, and could he play? Or is that too unlikely because...
I don't think that's likely, but I don't have x-ray vision and no one does. But the key will be, and as you pointed out, they got an x-ray machine in Texas. So,
that's right.
But as we're about to learn when we talk about Deebo Samuel of the 49ers, the x-rays of his shoulder were normal. The MRI of his shoulder was normal. He still had pain. And lo and behold, they did a CAT scan, which is a three-dimensional 360-degree x-ray, and found a hairline fracture.
Wow, okay.
So the x-ray machine that's on the facility is one thing, but obviously you would want to have the whole kit, kat, and caboodle of tests to really see, is it a loose bolt at the base of the windshield wiper, the base of the thumb, or is it broken?
So going back to Stafford, if it is, let's assume it's not broken and it is just a loose bolt, is that a just, hey, let it be type of thing?
It really depends, and I don't mean to hedge, but the different ligaments and tendons that allow your thumb to move make a world of difference in terms of, like, real estate, location. I have a beauty mark on my forearm. It's no big deal. You get a beauty mark, it's not cancer, on the lens of your eye, you're blind.
Wow.
Location. So which tendon, which ligament, and where is it at the base of the thumb will make a huge difference.
Wow. Okay, now the other. If it is broken, you said pins?
Pins, too, because there's so many forces on the base of the thumb that a fracture that is a break in the bone, those bones have so many tendons pulling in different directions that you will actually pull the bones apart. They will not be helping you, they'll be hurting you. And you need to line up the bone to be perfect. Otherwise, you're going to have, and if you don't put pins in, the pieces will pull apart.
What's the recovery if he or any athlete has surgery and pins are in?
It's too hypothetical because it really depends, but it's not good for the season. You know what I mean? It's going to be a protracted period of time you'd be out.
It's interesting you say that. I'm a word guy, and at the beginning of the season, Sean McVay said, we're going to go as far as Matthew Stafford leads us. He didn't say carry us.
Right.
He leads us. And I'm like, if that thumb is broken, so are the Rams' hopes. They're broken for the season as well.
He is that important as a fan, as a sportscaster, as a surgeon. He's that important to the team.
I got to tell you, it reminded me of one final story as we wrap up this segment is I interviewed Ron Gould, who is the running back coach for the Rams. He has spent 25 years in college football, and this is his first as the Rams. You wouldn't, Dr. Klapper, you would love this guy. Here's what he says. So here's the throwback. when he was 14 years of age, his dad was in prison for doing drugs. He's being raised in Arizona. And at age 14, his mom dies in a horrific car accident. He's got no family. I said, you go from that 14-year-old boy to where you are now. It's right. You're shaking your head. It's remarkable. And he says, and I would love every young adult to hear this. I made a decision one night that I wasn't going to let my circumstance dictate my future.
Wow.
And what a great story.
Wow.
And that's tying it back to Stafford. That's what, or any athlete who gets injured, you can't let your circumstance dictate your future.
You know, we saw Drew Brees, his thumb hit the helmet, and he tore the ligament that gives stability to the joint. Same thing that happened to Mike Trout and Chris Paul. It's called a gamekeeper's thumb. So you have no stability when you go to grip because the ligament lets the thumb open up. And it's as bad as a fracture, if you will, and it needs to be fixed. So there's so many different injuries that could have taken place, and it remains to be seen which one we'll be dealing with.
But that's a key point because Stafford hit his.
Yes.
That was the original start of it on the touchdown before. No, hold on. They scored a touchdown. They went for two, missed it, and that was the play where he hit his thumb on someone's helmet.
Right. So if striking it dead on, then you worry about the bone breaking, a load, if you will. But if it would happen in Drew Brees' case, your thumb hits the helmet and it pulls the thumb further away from the index finger, that rips the ligament that skiers get when they're holding their ski poles, and that usually needs to be fixed with surgery, particularly in an elite athlete.
So I wasn't an elite athlete, but I've done that before skiing. I skied all the time.
So you strained and sprained that ligament and didn't rip it completely.
So in tying this all together, when we talk about, okay, he's in Texas, they have x-ray machines, but if he tore that ligament, the x-ray would show, no, it's not broken, but he maybe tore his ligament, and that's why they're saying we got to wait till we get back to Los Angeles.
Correct. That is correct.
Look at us connecting some dots with Dr. Klapper's help. Hey, we're going to talk about Deebo Samuel, Kirk Cousins, plenty more on the Weekend Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Curt Sandoval, Dr. Klapper. We'll see you in just a second. Welcome back to the Weekend Warrior Show. I'm your host, Curt Sandoval, along with Dr. Robert Klapper. So as we start this next segment, you had mentioned in this break, you read a recent book. You want to give us a little teaser, not just about the book, but why you like to read and why that advances your knowledge base.
Well, I just finished one book by Rich Paul called Lucky Me, the guy who started Clutch Sports, one of LeBron James's closest members of his organization, but the life and how he took himself from truly the streets in Cleveland. And he did he admits bad things, but that's all was at his disposal. And the opportunities that I had, he didn't have. And my dad was a carpenter. But how he feels about his father and how I felt about my father, it's an amazing story of family. His mom is addicted to crack, cocaine.
Wow.
How he raised himself, essentially, but it culminates in how he finally meets, by accident, at the Akron airport, which is not that far from the Cleveland airport. He's already established himself, but why LeBron James took notice of him as a stranger in the airport. I don't want to give it away.
Yeah.
And people give him credit. Oh, you were lucky to meet LeBron. This book is called Lucky Me because apparently there's a Jay-Z song where those words are in there. But it's just like my life, just like your life. People look and say, Curt Sandoval's lucky. Yeah, Dr. Klapper's lucky. But let me tell you, you knock on 1,000 doors. Yeah, when the 1,001 door opens, they say you're lucky. But they don't know that you knocked on 1,000 other doors. And he is able to put it in words, Rich Paul, better than anybody else.
We're talking in the break, and I do travel a lot, and I think I'm going to Green Bay this week. I think that's where I'm starting the book.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that we all have the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
A little foresight to all of our listeners and all of our viewers is I do a lot of podcast listening, and the common theme and the most successful people I know, yourself included, they're readers. Yeah. And a lot of people just talk about, hey, these healthy habits. And when I was a young parent, I used to teach my kids, I wouldn't say, hey, your allowance. I would say, hey, here's our healthy habits list. Yeah. And one of the healthiest habits, eating right, we know, exercising, getting proper sleep. But the most successful people in the world are readers because it takes your brain to places that you don't know. So appreciate you sharing that story. Deebo Samuel, I'm, as a sports broadcaster, Journalism 101, you're not a fan. Every time you're in the press box, in fact, yesterday, and as we taped this on a Monday, when I was in Dallas, they were up 33-9, and the PA announcer had to remind the press, this is a working environment. There's no cheering in the press box. And so we don't cheer, but we're human. and after the 49ers started 5-0, they've lost 3 straight now. And Deebo Samuel is part of the reason they've lost their last 2 is because he's hurt. This is one of the most talented athletes I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because I saw Jay Glazer also had a comment. This is the reason that they're losing, because he's not just next man up.
No.
This man is not uppable.
Exactly.
What is it, in your opinion, Curt, that makes him so special?
Speed and size. You can't teach some God-given skills. He's got a God-given size that he's a running back that can run like a wide receiver, and you just don't have that. So Kyle Shanahan, who's one of the most God-given brains, and with him and Christian McCaffrey, they just do things. Sean McVay always, before they got Christian McCaffrey, he called Deebo an outlier. And he goes, just like we have an outlier in Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp can do things. Deebo Samuel can do things that it's not next man up, because God didn't create a bunch of Deebo Samuels. He might have the same hamstring, the same knee, all that, but what he can do with his God-given speed and his God-given size, and then you put him in an environment with Kyle Shanahan, it's unstoppable, virtually unstoppable. But he injured his shoulder.
Yes.
So what do you know about that injury? Because it's his rotator cuff.
It is not his rotator cuff. But his rotator cuff is adjacent.
Okay.
Just like real estate. Where do you live? Beverly Hills adjacent. His rotator cuff adjacent. And his diagnosis is called a hairline fracture, which means the bone is cracked, but it's not pulled apart. We call it a non-displaced fracture. And it almost minimizes, well, why is he out for 4 weeks from that injury if it's just a crack in the bone, it's not pulled apart? And here's the reason. And I brought a model.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Hairline fracture. I've heard that. How do you, is that from a hit or is that wear and tear?
It is not wear and tear. It is totally always related to trauma, to a hit.
Okay.
And I brought a model, which we'll get into in a second. And actually, before we do, I'll do the model right now. When we're talking about a hairline fracture in the shoulder, and that's all they've released. So your shoulder has 3 bones that are hairline possible. Your collarbone is part of your shoulder.
Okay.
Bone in front, the clavicle. The top of your shoulder represents the front of your shoulder blade, the scapula, where the socket of the ball and socket joint is.
So that would be on me here?
Right here on top.
Okay.
And as you mentioned before, what lives right deep, you can't feel it, but I'm showing you a picture here, is the rotator cuff. This is the rotator cuff adjacent, which is the acromion on the top. So clavicle, the scapula, acromion, which is part of the scapula. So that's 2 of the 3 bones. And then the final Third bone of the three that make up your shoulder is the humerus, the arm bone where the rotator cuff attaches. So one of these three guys is fractured, cracked, not displaced. They haven't revealed which one. He got hurt. They did an x-ray, negative. They did an MRI, negative. And then they did the ultimate to really see a fracture in all its forms, even tiny little cracks, a CAT scan, which is a 360-degree x-ray. And on that, because he had persistent pain, that's why they insisted on doing the CAT scan. Then they noticed the crack. But it is not the reason that it's just cracked that he's going to be out 4 weeks. And this is what I want the weekend warriors to appreciate. Look at all the tendons that I have here that are this brown attaching to the different bones. So Eli, let's go to some Klapper vision.
Producer Eli working overtime to get that.
Right. So the boat, the dock, they're like two bones, if you will, of your shoulder. The rope that attaches the boat to the dock so it doesn't float off into the lake here is the tendon, the soft tissues, if you will. Athletes, patients, weekend warriors who rip the rope, they are at risk for the boat floating away because there's no longer a connection between the boat and the dock. That would be a soft tissue injury, a tear to the tendon to the rotator cuff.
Would you, if that were the case, would you surgically repair that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you would be surgically repairing that.
Okay.
And that would be something we would see on the MRI. But what else could happen to this boat, rope, dock story? So Eli, let's go to the next photo. And in this photo, you have a close-up of the rope attaching to this metal prong, which is attached either to the boat or to the dock. That is the equivalent of the tendon of, for example, the rotator cuff attaching to the bone. We talked about the rope being ruptured, but what else could happen if you bust the wood where the cleat, that metal prong attaches? Now you're still at risk for the separation between the tendon. As the boat tries to drift away, it's not because the rope is ruptured that it will be disconnected. It's because you busted the wooden or bone attachment of the tendon or the rope.
Okay, so 3 years ago, I'm riding my mountain bike, and I'm at the end. It was an epic mountain bike ride, by the way, Dr. Klapper. And as my buddy said when I fell, probably the wrong time to tell you, but you were hauling.
What?
And I go to the bottom, and literally, it's 20 yards and we're done. And as I hit the soft dirt, I crash. Now, I fractured my left shoulder, the big ball joint. What is that?
The humerus.
The humerus, okay? And there's a crack in it. You can see. Before I went to the doctor, I'm like, I broke my collarbone. I mean, I thought I'm going to be in full surgery, and shows maybe I'm a little soft. It was, honestly, it was the most excruciating thing. I couldn't move my shoulder for 2 weeks, and all it was is a crack in the humerus.
That was a hairline fracture, which Deebo Samuel could have had, or that could be the bone that they're talking about. But the reason he's an elite athlete, like you just pointed out, but the reason he needs to be held back, the bone will go on to heal just like in Curt Sandoval's
by itself. That's where it's going.
But what will prevent it from healing is if the rope keeps trying to pull on the cleat that's broken. If the tendon continues to pull on the crack, the hairline fracture, it is a deforming force that you need to keep quiet in a sling, not move it, so that you're not making a hairline fracture, a non-displaced fracture, into a displaced fracture, because then we have to operate.
Okay, so let's step it up a little bit. You said, hey, the MRI was negative, the X-ray was negative, and then they do the CAT scan, this three-dimensional image that really shows it. Is that, give me a little bit more on that. Does that mean it's deeper and they couldn't see it, or is it smaller? Does that reflect to you anything else? when you hear that?
The CAT scan, let me think of a good Klapper vision for you. When you ride in your car, they will say you got to be careful because you'll have a blind spot.
Right.
You've got your rear view mirror, you have your side mirror, and yet there are many people who move lanes. Yep. They move lanes, bam, and they hit he's in that one spot that the rear view mirror and the side mirror don't see, and you smash into the guy on the right-hand side because you try to pass someone on the right and you should always do it on the left. It's POV, point of view. Well, an X-ray, even if we get 2 views, front and side, 3 views, front, side, and diagonal, that's just 3 views. But a CAT scan gives us every view. So the eyes don't see what the mind doesn't know. You can be told on these 3 views, we don't see a crack. Deebo Samuel says, my shoulder hurts. It's killing me. You got to get me a better test. Let's get a test that there is no blind spot. That's a CAT scan with an X-ray with no blind spot, and that's why you see it.
So one of the things that is in my simple athletic mind, the weekend warrior mind, if you will, is if Deebo Samuel is hurt from this, and you're telling me, hey, so these ligaments don't create a bigger problem and it's immobilized, which they're surely doing, is how do they know when enough rest is enough rest? If it's 4 weeks, what if he comes back in 4 weeks and it should have been 6 weeks? What if 4 weeks was enough and he doesn't come back in 6 weeks?
Again, depends on the location of the hairline fracture. The other question you might want to ask me is, when he does come back, will he be 100%?
And that was actually what I was going to say is, are they? I was going to ask it in a way, are they concerned that it's football, he's gonna take another hit?
So he for sure will have some weakness because he's injured, and you have to rest, and therefore the muscles are not firing normally, so they're going to atrophy and weaken a little bit. But here's the beauty of it being an upper extremity injury. He can still get on the bike. He can still stay in NFL aerobic conditioning so that when that 4-week timetable is up, he'll come back with endurance and aerobic conditioning. He may be a little weaker, but my opinion is when he does return, he will be pretty close to 100% Deebo.
I want to, because, and Eli, if we can go back to the photo of Deebo, we talked about, I mean, you can just see the physical nature of this man. He is a physical phenomenon. And as are most NFL players. Most NFL players are in great shape. What he can do with that. You mentioned he could get on the bike. Would you wait all 4 weeks before you just put a football in his hand like that at practice and he's running cones?
Pain will be a better indicator. Pain was the indicator that your studies are wrong.
Right, with the X-ray and the...
And same thing is true. Before the gluing, let's use that as a term for healing a busted bone, before the Elmer's glue is hardened, while it's still that white, moist stuff, but then it becomes a little sticky until it becomes clear and is permanent. As the healing bone called callus is not mature yet, it's not the clear Elmer's glue, it's still white, you have enough connection. Pain-wise, you may say, my shoulder doesn't hurt. And we won't see the healing bone callus, it's called, on the X-ray yet, but you will say it doesn't hurt anymore. That would allow me to say you can hold a football and go run.
All right, so I'm a sports guy. Clearly, Dr. Klapper is an orthopedic surgeon, so let me do the translation for the football fans here. Keep him on your bench for 2 to 3 more weeks and go pick up a backup. All right, that's Deebo Samuel. I'm Curt Sandoval with Dr. Robert Klapper. This is the Weekend Warrior Podcast. We're going to come back, talk a little Kirk Cousins in just a minute. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Weekend Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Curt Sandoval, with Dr. Robert Klapper. Thank you for joining us. It's always entertaining when we tape these on Monday. It's also somewhat sad to see some of these injuries, and you think about the late, great Kobe Bryant tearing his Achilles tendon and the mental strain that caused on him. And then the season started, and Aaron Rodgers and the mental strain that started on him. And here, Kirk Cousins. And finally, when I was in Dallas Sunday, and I was looking at the statistics, and Kirk Cousins before this injury was like third in passer rating, even though that they weren't having a great year. They were turning the ball over in other places, but he was having a terrific year. He tore his ACL, Achilles tendon, not his ACL. And it's just deflating. But in talking to you and in my time knowing you, it's not what it used to be back in the day.
It's such an exciting time for us in orthopedic surgery because this injury, and let's just go directly to the anatomy. So here's the calf muscle, the gastroc muscle, the medial and the lateral head, and you can feel on your own body the back of your calf. Deep to it is another muscle called the soleus that gives the width of the calf muscle, and they coalesce, come together to form this fascia, this fibrous band, like canvas-like material, and then it solidifies and becomes a rope, if you will. That's the Achilles tendon attaching to the heel bone. They always tear in the same spot because of the blood supply. It's about an inch above the heel, the back of your heel bone called the calcaneus. They rupture in that same spot. And traditionally, we have fixed these very successfully. People coming back to play, Kobe Bryant came back to play, by putting stitches, tendon, and sewing them together. But there are two beautiful advances in our modern world that we have now that allows us, as you saw, Aaron Rodgers 2 months after his surgery, he's on the sidelines
throwing a football
with his back foot loading his Achilles tendon, not in a boot. And the reason is because the advance two things. One, we no longer are sewing the two ends of the tendons and leaving it at that, protecting them in a boot and getting it to heal. The decision now is made, put the stitches into the tendon, but also, instead of just stopping by sewing it back to the other end of the rib tendon down below, anchor the stitches into the bone itself. Wow. So the back of the heel, the calcaneus, where this blue strip is, we put 2 drill holes and anchors, literally anchors into the bone so that the tendon is rigidly locked into the bone. That's the big first advance, is to think of it differently than we did before in terms of how to repair it. And the second thing is, when you use stitches, you have to tie a knot, which makes this bulging product, if you will. And if you feel the back of your Achilles tendon, there's skin and the tendon. There's not a lot of room for you to have a bulky bunch of knots and sutures. So the other big advance we have now is we can lock the stitches without tying a knot.
Wow.
So it's flat. So it's not rubbing, not irritating. Those two advances, bolting the tendon back into the bone and using sutures that are bulletproof material like Kevlar called fiber wire without knots so it doesn't rub. This is why, thanks to Aaron Rodgers, who's really pushing the needle for us in terms of recovery and will inspire every other football player that tears their Achilles tendon going forward.
You mentioned something just right there that you had brought up when we were discussing Aaron Rodgers. The stitches themselves are of a Kevlar, and that's a pretty significant change in terms of the rehabilitation and how quickly they can come back, yes?
Yes, because you always protected patients traditionally from rotator cuffs, from biceps, whatever tendons that rupture, quadriceps that we're fixing. We always worried, could you fire the muscle and rip through the tendon itself because the material was weak. Now we have sutures made of material that you can't break with your own hands. So that worry is not there.
One of the things I love about this show that you've demonstrated for us is the process, the Klapper visions of understanding. But the other part of it, quite frankly, that I enjoy is for you, the viewer, the listener, preventative medicine.
Yes.
And I come from a family, Dad was an athletic director, Mom was a nurse. Mom always taught us RICE, rest, ice, compress, elevate. When I, back in my marathon days, I had a little plantar fasciitis at one small point, and they were explaining how this goes to here and comes up here.
Correct.
And in the diagram that they showed me at my rehab place, they said anything that's white means there's less blood flow. And they said, think about it. As we tape, I'm standing up. And what's controlling the blood flow is your heart, right?
Yes.
And so it's harder to get blood flow down in the bottom of your foot where your plantar fasciitis is. Is there something that a weekend warrior, if Dr. Klapper, if they said, my Achilles seems tight, I mean, should they lay on their back with their foot up to get more blood flow? What else can people do so they are not Kirk Cousins and rip this thing?
There's a lot of variables. First of all, age. If you critically look at the bell-shaped curve, we don't see 18-year-olds coming with torn Achilles tendons. It occurs because a bell-shaped curve means there's a couple of 18-year-olds, and we really don't see it in the 60-year-olds. We see it, where's the peak where they all seem to congregate? 35 years old, thank you very much.
Really?
So 32 to 37 years old, and you'd have to look at the age of Aaron Rodgers, of Kobe Bryant, of Kirk Cousins. And why is that?
Can I guess?
Yes.
Can I guess?
Yes.
Why at the top?
Yeah.
Because their Achilles is older, but so it's getting thinner or not as strong, but they still think they're the 18-year-old.
Well,
is that close?
That's close.
Or
but
performing like an 18-year-old.
yes, but you have the Klapper vision is you still have a 68 Nova that you're driving, and it's not a Prius, okay? So it's going to rattle a lot louder when it hits the pothole. But here's the best Klapper vision. I'm 66 years old, pinch the back of my hand. We can wait for a half an hour for my skin to flatten. You take an 18-year-old, Eli, and pinch the back of his hand, snap, instantaneously. The aging process that leads to cataracts, heart valves calcify, my skin is like this. It's as if you took my bungee cord and left it out in my truck in the sunlight for 66 years versus the bungee cord that's right out of the package, which is elastic. Drying out means you can do all the stretches you want. But when you're 50 and you're doing stretches, I'm telling you, the collagen is not elastic anymore. That bungee cord is not, it may elongate, but don't confuse elongation with elasticity.
Okay, expand on that. Elongation versus elasticity.
So the same stretching exercise that the trainer tells a 60-year-old, come on, touch your toes, do calf planks or whatever they want to call that. You may be getting the range of motion, but you're tearing very brittle collagen fibers in a 60-year-old to you're tearing the brittle fibers versus the 20-year-old who's doing calf raises and touching their toes. Their bungee cord is elastic. They both look like they have the same range of motion, but one is ripping tendon, the other is stretching tendon.
So let's take that a step farther. If I were to know a almost 60-year-old who wants to keep running,
I would give you my card and say that you're pre-op.
But I don't want to be pre-op. And I know there's people out there. I want to keep running the marathons. Is there any preventative thing, or do you just say, Sandoval, quit running marathons, get on the elliptical?
My wife says I never answer the question, so here I'm going to answer the question. We've all been in our car with that jogger, we're at the red light, who is running in the bike path.
Right.
He's overweight, his arms are flailing, his belly is enormous, because once he's done running, he's convinced himself he burned 400 calories, so he's going to eat 2 bags of potato chips. I mean,
instead of 1.
His technique of how heel strike, mid stance, toe off, how he lands as each step of his run is catastrophic to the discs in his back, to his muscle, versus the Curt Sandoval, who knows technique, who is graceful like a gazelle, like an impala, and has beautiful form, who gets to be bell-shaped curve. That we all want to be on that side of the bell-shaped curve. We may genetically not be able to be there, but we all want to think that we're there. And so that is why the kinds of socks you wear, the kinds of shoes. Remember John Wooden?
Yeah.
How he tormented his... These are McDonald's All-Americans before there was a McDonald's or an All-American. But these were the greatest basketball players in the country. Bill Walton would be the first one to tell you. He would basically say, good, you're not in high school anymore. You're in my gym, and I'm your coach, and I need to teach you how to put your shoes and socks on. Again, John Wooden ahead of the curve. It has nothing to do with the shoes and socks.
Yeah.
It's his point was, I need to teach you fundamental. And I don't mean bounce pass.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even know how to put your shoes and socks on.
Life fundamental. You know, it's interesting. One of the things I'm so grateful for this platform, because I grew up running. My dad was a cross-country coach. My brother was an All-American cross-country runner. Wow. He was incredible. And you know the Geico commercials now, don't be your parents, you know? I'm that guy, when you brought up seeing the runner, I'm that guy that will pull up next to someone who's running on concrete. And I'm like, just get on the asphalt. Right. Just get on the asphalt. Right. As, you know, I always thought, no, I'll defy the odds. I'll be that guy still running in my 70s, and I don't run that much anymore. Right. Because it's not the age of the car, it is the miles on the car. And when I was young, I put a lot of miles on the car. But the one thing I would tell all the runners out there, if you can still run, great for you. Yeah. But there's also hiking. And hiking is a dirt trail, and you're going up a mountain, so you're getting the same you're usually up above in altitude somewhere, so you're getting those benefits. But it really is, it's like layers of an onion. Yes. That you're how about that Sandoval Klapper vision?
Sandal vision.
No one's better than the Klapper vision than Dr. Robert Klapper. But it is layers of an onion of technique, socks, shoes, don't run on concrete, proper form. You see too many people going side to side instead of running. It's all of the above.
You know, I'm not here to say stop exercising. You're killing yourself, except kind of. But everybody listening wants to know, well, where am I on the bell-shaped curve? Am I that guy you just said has beautiful technique who can run into his 90s? Or am I the guy so I don't want to leave you hanging. It isn't what supplements should I take to beat the system, or what surgery can I do to a Little League elbow so they can pitch with Tommy John where the Little League father actually thinks you become stronger. So it's not surgery, it's not a supplement. Here's what I would tell you. We've been given from up above the greatest feedback of how we're doing. And each of us have it individually. Pain. The four-letter word that I love. Not because I'm a surgeon and I like fixing people with a knife. No, I like to write books about here's what you can do not to need surgery. Heal your hips, heal your knees. These are books I've written. But the key, which I love, is pain. Your next door neighbor can do whatever the hell they want in terms of run forever and be in shape and eat whatever they want. But if you have pain, I don't like no pain, no gain. Mm-hmm. If it hurts when you do this, then ride the bike. Mm-hmm. If you can, as you say, take up hiking up a mountain because the terrain is different and you can do it with no pain, I'd rather you do that than say no pain, no gain and force your body to do something that it's telling you it doesn't want you to do. And that's the uniqueness. We each have a different pain threshold.
I love that. And to recognize what you said there is individually.
Yes.
Individually. I've had pain where, okay, I'm tired, my legs have a lot of lactic acid. There's also a pain that I had a couple years ago where it's like I couldn't even get on an elliptical because I was biomechanically not in line.
Correct.
So it's recognizing and it's that self-awareness. I love that we took Kirk Cousins and took a negative to him and spun it to a positive to the weekend warriors out there to self-evaluate, to think about these things. Because at the end of the day, everyone who's a weekend warrior, whatever, if you're playing football, basketball, baseball, golf, shooting hoops, whatever, you just want to keep going.
Yep.
You want to do it for as long as you humanly can, because it doesn't just help the body physically, it helps it between the ears.
Correct. Agree.
All right. Until next time, thank you very much. Have a great week. We look forward to your stories next week, Dr. Klapper.
Thank you, Curt.
Hey, guys, thanks for listening to the Weekend Warrior podcast. Wherever you're listening or watching, click on the link, and we're going to take questions again next week.
Great.
So wherever you're listening to, send us a question, and we look forward to talking to you next time on the Weekend Warrior podcast.